we're going to end today's series of topics and trends with one of my favorite things, an art talk, where we get to talk to the artists about their inspiration, their careers, how they got here. I'm Linda Mariano. I'm the Managing Director of Marketing for Artexpo New York and all of the shows that Redwood Media Group produces. We started doing art talks like this a couple of years ago, where we gather a panel of artists together and talk to them about who they are and what making art as your career is really all about. And today, we've got several artists, but you know what I don't have up here, guys, is I don't have the advancer. Oh, it's on the table. Okay. The first artist I want to talk to you about, okay, he'll do it for us, is RJ Munna. And RJ is here, the second from my right. And RJ is an incredible, world-class fine art photographer. All of our artists today for this art talk are fine art photographers. And RJ was one of the people that was involved in creating the Airbus corporate jets Nimbus artwork. You may have already stopped by the VIP lounge and seen the incredible artwork that RJ, along with Burn Dutch Smile, all created together. So how do you create a cloud in the middle of an incredible set, and then being there at the right time with the right intention to capture that moment? And that's really about, I think, all of RJ's work. When I look at it, that's what I think about it. In conversation with him, that's what I've learned. It's that moment, the capture of that moment, but not just, being the guy standing behind the camera, really being the guy standing behind the camera with intention. And I think that that's one of the things that sets a fine art photographer apart from the rest of us. Look, we're all photographers. We got this in our hand all the time. And one of the things that we see as a trend in the art world is the interest in fine art photography. It's definitely something that we're all a little more interested in today. And we think back to some of the world-class photographers. I think that we're seeing a resurgence of that and an interest in that in museum collections as well as in personal collections. The second artist is Paul, and Paul, say your last name for me.
Brandeis.
Brandeis. Well, he says it much more elegantly than I would have even tried to. And Paul is an abstract artist. You can see one of his pieces right in front of him, actually. And the part that I find so fascinating is the creativity that he brings to it. It's not just the photograph. It's what he does with it after the photograph is taken. And it's that marriage of digital photography with the, as he calls it, the unpredictability and the fluidity of paint. So it's going to be fun to talk to him a little bit. And then one of our artists could not be with us today, Vlad Coral, but his gallery director is with us today. So we're going to get a little different perspective from a gallery perspective about Vlad. And Vlad is really an interesting person because his work takes the idea of fine art photography, and what he says is he kind of freezes a moment cryogenically and develops that moment further. So not just what you and I might do with this, right? Really taking it to a next step. And last year, we had the pleasure of meeting for the first time Anders Derleth. And Anders is a wonderful photographer who really is inspired by the natural light and all of the aspects that the natural light around us really enhance. So whether it's city life here in New York, whether it's wildlife in Africa, or it's landscape photography, his photographs change your perspective on the things that you're looking at and the things that you've always seen. So that's who these people are. Let's ask them a few questions. One of the questions that I like to ask first is, when did you first start creating your artwork? When did that happen? For some artists, it happens, when they were a very young person. Others, it happens as even a career change. Anders, let's start with you.
Thank you. I started 35 years ago, together with my dad, actually, showing me the light and the vision of taking photos. And it starts to grow in 6-7 years ago, walking a lot in landscape areas and so on. So, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. And Paul, how about you? When did you first start creating your artwork?
Well, I started pretty young. I started almost from what I remember, I was always doing something with my hands, creating some kind of art, getting interested in that. But actually, I started painting when I was 15. Went to Banff School of Fine Arts and did 4 summers there of painting, and painted ever since. And I always did these weird shapes. Basically, the way that developed was poor. I had to make my own stretchers. I used little saw, put it together, and sometimes they came out crooked. And I looked at them and says, well, what's wrong with that? And actually accentuated that and kept going. I started into photography about 10, 11 years ago. I used to take photographs all the time. But as technology developed, I was able to buy my own printer. And because I like doing everything myself without sending anything out, that gave me the opportunity to start working on these shaped canvases with photography, and it took me about 3 years developing how to approach that, always having in mind that I wanted to mix it with paint. And as the years in the last 6 years, I started taking the paint onto the photographs. And actually this year I found a medium that will allow me to print onto my paintings, so that I can now expand my photos onto the paintings and really have them coming as one unit. So.
And RJ, how about you? When did you first start?
Oh, I started about 15. I stole my father's camera and started roaming the street, taking pictures of whatever interested me. And it was a way for me to get close to things that I thought were interesting and maybe were a little bit beyond what a 15-year-old could really get to. And it allowed me to get close to all kinds of things that one wouldn't normally. I would say that you can wander up with a camera, and for some reason people will pretty much leave you alone. But if you just wander up looking at something, it's a little bit more intrusive for some reason. I don't know why, but so that's a lot of years of shooting. Started obviously with black and white in a dark room, many years in a dark room, and eventually switched to digital, studied classical art and philosophy. And that's what, I can't say that I had a plan. There was never a straight line of this is what I want to do. I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, enough times to make that work for me.
So RJ and Paul kind of answered this question, but Anders, I want to go back to you. When did you really start pursuing photography as your career?
I think it was 6-7 years ago. It was a big IT company that actually saw my landscape pictures and thought that could be good as their decoration. So they contact me, and we start to plan for that. And then they have really big walls that they need to have some landscape on. So I start to actually figure out a little bit more what to do and how to do it. So I presented an idea for them and a vision of what it could look like, and they like it actually. They like it a lot. And then I start to imagine that this could be something. So I got that job. It was a really good job. We had one picture was like 450 square feet big, so it was quite big. We had this, what you call it, machine to just set it up. We were 4 person. And after that, it's just, I imagine this is something that I really want to do. This is something I love to do. And it's all started there.
So, and I have a question for you about Vlad with the gallery. What was it about Vlad and his artwork that was appealing to you? Do you carry other photography in your gallery? Are you a photography-only gallery? How does that work?
Thank you so much. First, I want to say that sorry, Vlad cannot come here for the audience, and I just want to give a small introduction of his works, how he starts. He started as a photojournalist back in 1980s in a different conflict zone around the world. And his first assignment was in Africa. And during the peace treatment between South Africa and Angola, American general present him his first Canon camera with a Kodak color film. And he started making color pictures in South Africa. And he figured out that the same object that he make a print in different countries have a different perspective of colors. And this is when he started to figure out how I can present same vibrant colors in a different setups. And we are, Vlad and me, long-time friends. We are friends from childhood. And I decided to present him on this great exhibition. And it's our first time, and I would like to thank jury to choose him as a spotlight artist, and I'm quite happy for his achievement. And I choose him because he's so advanced in technical skills in a so difficult environmental environment, and all his works was based on a first gift from American general. And he's not the only one that I'm presenting in my gallery, but he's my flagship artist that I'm proud to present everywhere in the world.
That's great. That's a great story. It's always good to get the perspective, I think, from the gallery and how that transpires. So here's a question that I love to ask, because the story is always interesting. The answer is always interesting because it's very memorable. RJ, do you remember the first piece of art that you sold, and why do you remember?
Wow, I can't say I specifically remember the first piece. I wish I did. I remember the first picture I ever took and developed in a tray. that one will never go away. But I took pictures all through school, and sometimes I would do it for friends and sometimes for a trade or something like that. And I think I just ended up selling the work kind of almost unknowingly. But I always had a purpose for why I was taking the picture, and selling the work was never at the bottom of that purpose. That was never the point for me. So I have to say that was never the objective, and I think that's why I don't really remember that one. Okay. But again, you have to remember, I'm an old guy and I've taken pictures for a long time. And that was quite a while ago. So, a lot of things have happened since then.
So Paul, what about you? Do you remember the first piece you sold?
Well, actually I do. Technically my first pieces were given away by my father. So can't say it was sold, but the first piece that it was actually a couple of paintings. What happened was I hung about 4 paintings in somebody's office, and for 3 months. And then when the 3 months were over, I came to pick it up, and the boss told me, look, you can't take these 2 paintings away. We're buying them because our employees won't let us leave these paintings to leave the office. So that was my actual first sale. So it was more than 1 painting. It was 2 paintings, and it felt great.
That's great. So, Anders, you already told us about the first piece that you sold, but since you began, has your artwork changed from that initial time that you sold that first piece to now, and how has it changed?
I always work with the natural light, even if it's in the middle of the night or if it's daytime. I think I'm not taking so much pictures today. I'm more focused on what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do it, and where I'm going to do, and where the place of it actually. So I'm planning every step much more in advance. I'm not go to a place I didn't know everything about, and that means the weather conditions, etc., etc. So for me, the planning stage has been so more important for me. And to do a great job, if it's landscape photography or if it's a wildlife in South Africa, to plan this and to do it step by step is really, it's really changed for me actually. So with saying that, 10 years from now, it was more maybe a coincidence that I got a good picture. Today I'm really planning it, and it's never a bad weather. It's just to get out there and try to actually find your spot and what you're looking for, and try to do the very, very best with that natural light that's coming right now. So yeah, that's changed a lot for me, yes.
And Paul, how about you? Has your work changed over time?
My work definitely changes. I look constantly to progress. I do a certain amount of within whatever the technique I'm using, but I constantly want to progress. As I was saying, I painted in the 70s, and I went from where I used a lot of washes, painting, into very abstract work, very clean, and got larger and larger and larger. And then now I came back down again into this little more painterly kind of a thing, combined with the photography, and working on really having a cohesion between the acrylic and the photography, and again expanding, as I said before, I've been able to take paint onto the photos, but now I want to take the photos onto the paint, and that's my next progression. And after that, I'm going to think of doing something else. I'm constantly giving myself some kind of a sort of a project to work through it, and then move on to another one.
RJ, how about you?
I'd like to say that I would like to think that my work hasn't changed, but it's changed because I've changed, and I've grown and seen more of the world and seen everything, and so it's constantly changing because of that. But I started out with the general idea that I wanted to take pictures that had a good idea involved. There was a concept there. I was always looking for the why of the picture, and that hasn't changed. The foundation of it is the same, but I've changed enough to where the things I actually want to shoot, they've changed. So yeah.
So you already told us that you've known Vlad since you were children. So I'm going to ask you that question. Have you seen a change in Vlad's work over the course of time?
It's not Vlad working with me with constant contact, and if he has some idea, he first asks me how we can make these works more presentable and more appealing to the public. And it's not just his works changing. During the process of creating the work, we exchange some ideas, and sometimes the first idea will change through the process, and in the end we have a different results. And yes, it's a constant change, not just from year to year, from day to day. It's from minute to minute of creating the piece of art that I believe he's doing every day in his life. Yeah.
Well, and I think that with today's technology,
Yes.
certainly things have changed in the world of photography since Ansel Adams' time, for example. And that's a great segue, by the way, into a question I have to ask you, RJ. When I look at that Nimbus collection, all I can think of is, wow, talk about intention. Talk about thinking about, what's the goal, what's the objective. And there, the goal and objective, obviously, was to work on the branding concept for Airbus corporate jets, and in a very elegant way, obviously. But how did that all come about?
Well, I had worked with Bernal before. He's the person that makes the clouds, and I think that it came about when you're doing work like that. There's a lot of talking. There's a lot of discussing the idea, and the question is constantly, why are we making this picture? What are we trying to say? What is the point of communication? And I think you, as a photographer, you have to think that almost every time you pick up a camera, whether it's a conscious thought or, hopefully while you don't think about it too much, you just do it. But when you're working with other people and working with a team of people, you have to communicate your intention, you have to communicate the why, and understand the objective of the image. And that's all wrapped up in a lot of talking and a lot of discussing. And the talking is good because you end up on the same page. You end up discussing the image to the point where everyone understands everyone else's intentions, and that helps quite a bit. And I'm the person then that has to carry it all out. So
That's where.
yes.
Okay, but I have to ask, and really, if you haven't seen these images, you have to go over to the VIP lounge and see this Nimbus collection before you leave, because I just have to know, how do you make a cloud inside a room? How does that happen?
You mean just physically?
Yeah, how does that happen?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of factors, and when you look at Bernal's work, the idea basically is to duplicate the process that a cloud forms in the atmosphere. So the reality of it is that there's a certain temperature that the room has to be, and generally that's pretty cold. There's water vapor that he puts into the room. There's a little video over in the booth about how that's made. And then there's a particulate that is also in the sky. And so he's duplicating what nature does on a massive level on a much smaller scale. And the images in these the clouds in these images, they aren't placed in. We're shooting them in place. So the scale of what those clouds are is what they actually are. And they change in size and they change, and the conditions are there. But once we get the conditions right, it happens. And, as the photographer, you have to be very prepared at the moment for when it happens. It doesn't last long.
Okay, so, I have to tell you that one of my ideas when I knew that RJ was going to be here was, let's make a cloud, right? Why can't we make a cloud here? And then they did say that, well, when you're flying in an airplane and you look on the monitor, if you're on United, there's a little monitor and it tells you, how many miles or what temperature it is outside. Pretty darn cold outside. So the images look terrific, but those people dancing probably also had goosebumps, and he doesn't get that part on the camera.
And that's true too.
So, Paul, question for you. Are there influences? Earlier today we had a seminar on design and design trends and the influence of color and design in our lives, whether it's the clothes that we wear or the furnishings that are in our homes, even to the point of how our homes are built. And depending on what part of the country our homes are in, it might have more of if you're on the coast, more of open kind of architecture versus in the city, it might be more of a closed kind of architecture, certainly with windows, but not as expansive as it might be on the coastline, that sort of thing. So those are design trends, and all of that has an influence on really every aspect of our life. Are there trends that influence your art, Paul?
I'm not quite sure because I don't really pay attention to trends. I sort of do my own thing, but I'm sure that subconsciously I must be influenced by what is happening around me and obviously of the trends, but I don't consciously go out and sort of look, oh, this is a trend and I should go that way. I just don't do that.
Well, see, I think you all are kind of on trend because, as I said earlier, I think photography in the art world is definitely something that people are more interested in today than they have been over the last decade, for example. Anders, are there trends or things that influence your art?
I think it's. I'm going to take it in a little another way, actually, but I think it's a change in the landscape photography. Many landscape photographers they go out and they take their picture and then they Photoshop it very, very much. They add a sunset, they explore the colors of everything and so on. So talking about trends, what I have discovered is that people, they would love to see what I have seen when I'm taking the picture, not the Photoshop version of it. So more or less, I discovered that the trends in the landscape photography is more going back to the basic. So you can easily go out to the audience, to people, to say, this animal or this landscape view is exactly as I saw it when I took the photo, without the photoshopping thing, without the add extra sunset and so on. And I think that starts to be a trend, a little bit more honest from your heart, not the Photoshop way of doing it.
So here's another question, and RJ talked a little bit about technology, obviously creating a cloud in the room, but I want to go back to Vlad for just a minute because I'm pretty fascinated with this idea of his of cryogenically freezing images. What does that mean? Or what does that mean to him and in his artwork?
In some, as you said, the constant change in environment, light, air clearness, air pressure, make it quite challenge to take a one shot and get the color or expression of your picture that you already have in mind. And to be able to make several shots, you need to freeze an environment for some time to control environment. And the only process you can do it's just to create some liquid, like we did. It's a special solution. It's not just the water. We put some objects like flowers, and we freeze it for the long time and set up a special set of lights using lasers, special lights, special conditions, and this process we use the different set of cameras just to capture the different elements inside of this freezing block of flowers, for example, or other objects. This is what create the technical challenges just from the beginning of the process till the end. And most of the advanced techniques comes from the understanding of different types of lights, how it goes through the different materials and how it reflects, how it works and speak with the audience. And this is how we create this cryogenics idea.
So see, I told you these people were different than me with my camera. So I think that everybody, there's times in your life, there's things that happen in your life that are inspiring. They've given you confidence. They've made a difference in your career, in your business, in how you think about things. And so I'd like to explore that just a little bit. Anders, are there times or moments in your career, and I get it that your career is maybe in photography is a little bit shorter than RJ's, but is there a pivot point? Is there something that you recall that gave you confidence, that really made you, or something that you did that really made that impact for you?
I think I'm in the middle of that period right now, actually. 2 years ago, I'm started to express myself in social media. And by today, I have over 40,000 followers around the world in Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And that makes a major change, a real major change, actually, to my business. I'm doing some live videos here yesterday and today. And it took 2 hours for people from New York come and see me and said, I saw you on the live video. And that's scary. It's really scary because it's now, it's for real, it's here, and it's live. And that makes a big change because the audience can follow me if I'm in South Africa, in Sweden, Norway, Iceland, New York, whatever. So I think I'm actually in the middle of something happened, something going on. So every week it's added an 100 to 150 extra followers all the time in that social media. So I'm thinking as I said, I'm in the middle of it.
How about you?
I mean, as I said, I started by stealing my father's camera when I was 15. By the time I got to college when I was 18, that was a huge change in just my life. Obviously, I had to take care of myself and find my own way. But all of a sudden, studying classical art, I was never subjected to the masters, the old painters, the Renaissance painters, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to take this kid who sits in an art history class, and all of a sudden this barrage of images starts filling your head with the ideas of, in a sense, the ages, and how they affected me was huge. And, this concept of intention, the concept of why, that's when that idea was planted in my head. And I continue to explore it. And I have to say, because I was also a philosophy minor, a lot of that connects up. So as a philosophy minor, you're asking why all the time. You're discussing it in your own head, and I always found it was great to discuss it with other people. So I have to say that a lot of the things that changed me and that, the turning points were not as consistently photographic, but they were external to the photography. They were the people I spoke with, the images that I saw, began to go to museums and see things like that. So as the world, came to me and I went to it created profound changes in me, and I'm still doing it. So every time I, travel to another country or something like that, I am the stranger in that country. And that's a very deep thing to go and realize, oh, I'm a stranger here and I need to understand this other place on its terms and not my terms. And that pretty much informs everything that I do in terms of the imagery. So,
Paul, how about you? Is there something that happened?
I would say that there's probably two instances. The first one would be when I was 15 and went to Banff School of Fine Arts, and I studied under a fantastic person. Her name was Hilda Lubane, and that is where my career as an artist started and drove me all through that. The next pivotal thing is I would say technology, is that I got into the photography when technology got to a point where I could buy a reasonable printer so that I could control and print my own prints instead of going outside. And before that, I would take photos but really not do anything with them. Afterwards is now I walk around with a camera and try and take shots that I think are interesting anywhere. Doesn't matter where I am. And then being able to use them in my artwork. And that's where the photography started, is basically with technology that allowed me to control my own printing.
So here's a question about for you about Vlad. If you know this answer, and I'm guessing you might, since you're so close to him, is the strategies. The strategies for today, the goals for the future. Where do you think he's headed?
The strategies, the whole concept of strategy, building not in your hand, it's building with the conversation of the audience you're working with. And if some, buyers or collectors telling me what he's thinking, what kind of emotion he has from the scene of Vlad works, we start to developing these emotions further. And it's not Vlad who creating his concept. His audience creates his strategy for the next piece of work. And this is feedback that I believe inspired every artist. It's coming not just from the artist, it's come from the people. And this is a strategy for the next piece of work, I believe.
Jay, how about you? Any strategies for the future?
I wish I could say there was a strategy. I wish I could, lay it down and say that, I have a plan. My plan is to take one step at a time, and every picture that I take is another cobblestone on that path. So I look at them and I try to be as present as possible for each image that I create, and try to not think too far beyond it, and try to really give everything I have to that present image. And then once that's done, I can look at it, move on to the next. And every time I create an image, it slightly veers my thinking a little bit left or right. And I'm not on a straight line. For me, nothing exists that way. It's always this sort of meandering system that something pushes me left and then the next image pushes me right. And but I try not to look too far down the road or too far on the horizon, because I don't want to anticipate change. I don't want to look at trends and say, oh, I can see that coming, I better do that. I don't want to think of my work that way. I want to think of it as being, present of the moment, in my own mind anyway.
How about you, Paul?
I basically set myself problems that I want to solve, and those are my steps. So when I solve a problem, I set myself a next one, and I want to progress from where I was before, and I mean that's basically my strategy.
How about you, Anders?
For my photography and landscape, I do have a plan. The plan is actually to move into other countries and so on. But I take that plan step by step a little bit more. But then I have a plan for my photo business actually. So I set up a 2-year plan. So I work pretty hard to see if I can be there in 2 years from now. And to be at the Artexpo is just one step at that plan. So it's for me it's different to have this photo kind of plan and the business of it. So yeah.
It's a balance.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, definitely. It's a balance. Yes, but they all combined all together. These two.
Well, the theme for Artexpo 2017 is Art Captivates. And I've been captivated by your answers, and I think each of you would be captivated if you went and saw more of their artwork. So, Anders, what booth are you in? What booth are you in?
What booth? Sorry. F431.
And Paul?
Presently, I'm in F240, but I'm listed as F355. So I actually have added that onto the sign.
All right, but physically, you're in...
Physically, I'm at F240.
Okay, and RJ, I told you where he is. His artwork is in that VIP lounge. And where can we see Vlad's work?
We are in booth F573, and please come and see all the Vlad's collection. I would love to present you after the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.